Hi there.
Hi,
How are you doing?
good. How are you?
I'm okay too. Thanks. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Wendy, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, I'm making Kevin a co-host because he's going to show his screen. All right.
All right, nice.
And then I'll do the same thing to Jeff when he gets in there. Somebody's in the waiting room already.
Oh, wow.
That's good. Some people like to come in early.
Exactly.
I just wanted to double check on something here with the questions. The only way people are going to be giving questions, because I haven't gotten any from you.
I didn't get any. No one gave them to me.
Right. So the only place I should open up chat.
Yes.
Why is that? Oh, I said full screen. Wait a minute. Okay, so now. Here, I just want to get. What is that?
And I'll tell them when I first open them up and let them in before I introduce Alex to do the real welcome. I'm just going to tell people that we're muting everyone except the speakers throughout the presentation. They can use chat features to ask questions, and they'll be shared with our presenters.
Oh, okay, I was going to say I put some housekeeping things in my notes because I didn't know what you were going to do. So
I'll say that, and then you can say that again.
Yeah. But so the bottom line is that I'm just going to be keeping an eye on questions that come in for chat. And I have, Kevin, some of the questions that I've shared in previous calls, both with you and Jeff, you'll hear again if you don't cover something in the subject. So I've got questions here,
Sure.
but I'll be keeping, the bottom line is that I'm keeping an eye on this chat, right, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay. So, and is it appropriate for the experience of the library to acknowledge Joe Schmo from East Norwalk is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
If you can figure out who it is, if they identify themselves, then you can say.
Right. What I'm going to do too is I'll be keeping an eye out. The way we talked about it is after Kevin is done, if there are one or two questions, Kevin, I've allocated a 5-minute window after your talk and Jeff's talk that are specific to your talk.
Okay.
If nothing, we'll just keep on going.
Sure.
Anything else that I wanted to tell? I know Jeff will be on fire. I will say this, Kevin, so you're not surprised. Well, not that you couldn't be surprised. I ended up leafing through the book again and pulled out, I was so struck by George Petty Jr. And I'm using a closing. I'm using, a quote that from this letter from when he was injured and recuperating in Australia.
Oh, so just so you know, I'm planning to use that in my presentation.
Well, so because what I love was this, thank God for wings. I'm thanking you guys for giving wings to these stories. Well, I'll figure out a way. I've got a couple of them in outline and keep it short and sweet. Just a quick check-in, Cindy. I thought also about the mayor. So I'm going to mention that he's a special guest in my opening remarks, that we're going to be joined by him. So he's going to give some what I'm calling reflections after Jeff is done. Yep.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we're doing with him, right? Is there anything I'm missing?
No, that's
okay.
That's it.
God, I mentioned earlier, Kevin.
Alex hasn't said that he's got to leave early, but I know he has the library board meeting tonight. So he may leave halfway through.
Alex.
Yeah, because unless he goes into the library board meeting late, but he's the president, so.
The important thing is that this is being recorded. I know at least probably 10 or 11 people. There's also some conflicting programs tonight.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, so it's great that it's being recorded. People are really looking forward to me sending the link, which I'm going to be proactive with it, not just saying, oh, check the library site. So yeah. God darn it, Kevin. That was like a really good one.
Well, Andrew's out in California and can't go see him, and he can't come see us, so we miss him. But
I hear you, but that's why we have Skype, and that's why we have Zoom.
And like you, Harry, he's a Dodger fan, so he's very happy.
Oh yeah, go Dodgers! They took the World Series this year.
So should we start, Cindy?
Yes, yes. So,
Roll. Let it roll.
Well, on behalf of the Norwalk Public Library, I want to welcome everyone to our program to honor veterans.
Yes, you're broadcasting for.
This year, it's especially important. Yes, this year it's especially important that we do so because we've been fighting a war against this COVID virus, and the example that veterans have always showed of putting country and patriotism first, putting aside their own personal career interests and working on behalf of the community are things that we all need to think about as the virus seems to be coming back for another attack against us. And so those qualities that veterans have always shown of selflessness, of patriotism, of sacrifice, and doing without now so that we can all do better in the future. These are values that I think are more important than ever now. So thank you to all of our veterans for their service to the country and for the example of showing what it means to be a patriot. I want to welcome and thank Mayor Rilling for joining us this evening. Harry, your beard is looking very good, I want to say.
I'm not in competition with you yet, but I might be someday.
I got a 30-year head start on you, I think, on that one. I want to thank Kevin Callahan and Jeff Dewitt for providing the program for this evening. I want to thank Wendy for helping to organize this, and Cindy Leahy, our program director at the library, for making these arrangements. The library considers it very important to be one of Norwalk's public institutions that make sure we never forget what veterans have done for our country and that we honor them at every opportunity. So thank you for coming tonight. And now my great pleasure to ask Norwalk's Mayor, Harry Rilling, who I think has done an excellent job defending the city against the virus and being cautious and careful. I want to thank him for that, to say a few words of welcome as well. Mayor Rilling?
Thank you, Mayor Knopf. And thank you to the Norwalk Public Library for presenting this program to honor our veterans. You know, veterans, by every definition, are the heroes of this country. They have left their homes, starting with the American Revolution, picking up weapons and laying down shovels to protect and defend this country and to provide for us the freedoms that we so much enjoy. And programs like this are so important because we need to keep this thing that we need to keep this going forward so that our young people never, ever take for granted the freedoms that veterans have given their lives to protect. So I am very, very thankful to be invited to this. There are so many things that I could say about veterans and about the feeling of service to this great country that we just need to continue making sure that we never forget the sacrifices that our veterans have made. Those who left and never returned, as well as those who left and returned, perhaps with issues that we need to protect and service. And I'll just say this before I finish. Yesterday at the Veterans Committee, or the ceremony for Veterans Day, I recited something that I find so important, and it was it was written by an anonymous veteran, and it goes something like this. I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but it goes something like this: I was prepared to serve my country. I was prepared to go into battle. I was prepared to give my life if necessary. But when I came home, I was not prepared to be homeless, hungry, or unemployed. So let's make sure that we do all that we can to support our veterans when they return home and to thank them for all that they have done for us. So again, thank you for the Norwalk Public Library for doing this.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling. Just before I turn it over, I'm not sure, Cindy, to you or Wendy, who's going to do the introductions?
Wendy will.
Wendy, if I could, just before I turn over to you, I just want Kevin and Jeff to know that unfortunately, this second Thursday of the month is our regular Norwalk Library Board meeting, which starts at 7. I've delayed it till 7:15 so I could attend as much as possible. But if I get off early, I don't mean any disrespect, but we have this regular meeting that has to go forward. So I hope you'll understand. And thank you again for coming to help us out. Wendy? Wendy, you have to unmute.
Oh, thanks so very much, Alex. And it's a privilege to be with everyone here this evening in honor of Veterans Day and to welcome two very special guests, Kevin Callahan and Jeff Dewitt. Kevin is a Norwalk resident, writer and publisher, and the author of Brothers in Arms, Remembering Brothers Buried Side by Side in American World War II Cemeteries, and was just published last July 4th. Jeff was born and raised in Norwalk. He's a 26-year U.S. Air Force veteran who retired in the rank of Chief Master Sergeant, the top 1% of all enlisted grades. He has researched countless veterans from Norwalk and their stories for his project, norwalkctheroes.org. So we're going to hear from each one of them, followed by a few reflections from our other special guest, Mayor Harry Rilling. And it's worth noting also, importantly, Mayor Rilling served as not only Norwalk's police chief for 17 years, born and raised in Norwalk, but he's also a proud veteran of the U.S. Navy. And as you heard, an advocate for veterans issues in Norwalk. Then we will open up the room for questions, which we invite you to post on chat. And also, lastly, this is being recorded and will be available on the library's site. So you can share it with everyone who didn't make it tonight. What do we know about our warriors who have died? I mean, one of the things as I got to know Kevin and I've known Jeff, thinking about their work, but these people have made the ultimate sacrifice in service to America for our freedom. And we don't know very much about them. And the question that I began holding is, well, why are their stories important? Why is it important for us to know this and appreciate them? These are some of the questions that I think Kevin and Jeff each held as they began their journeys and their research for their projects. But I'd like to ask each one of you on this call to also hold these questions as we listen to their stories. Kevin, over to you.
All right. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. All right. Can everyone see that? All right. Well, thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. And thank you, Cindy, and to the Norwalk Public Library for inviting me to speak today about my new book called Brothers in Arms, Remembering Brothers Buried Side by Side in American World War II Cemeteries. So the inspiration for this project and this book really started about 30 years ago. I played football at Yale, and after college, I went backpacking in Europe and went to Normandy and visited the cemetery there. And probably like a lot of you, I'd heard stories about World War II growing up. My parents were too, they remembered World War II, but they were too young to serve. they both had uncles who served in World War II. But I heard stories about the war, but going to the cemetery really impacted me. And I just happened to take a picture while I was there of this gravesite of Frank McNally. And I realized that it was due to the sacrifice of people like him. I mean, he was probably about my age at the time he died. And it was only due to the sacrifice of service members like him that I was able to travel through a free and prosperous Europe some 50 years later. And this photo has hung on my wall ever since. And then about 10 years ago, I was traveling in Italy with my wife and 3 young sons, and we went to the Sicily-Rome American Cemetery. And there I captured a picture of the main statue there, which became the inspiration for the title of my book. And the statue is called Brothers in Arms, and it features a soldier and sailor walking arm in arm. And then I captured this unscripted photo of my 2 oldest boys, Max and Finn, walking arm in arm through the gravesite. And then we came across this, which is the burial site of Fred and Edgar Wood, who are 2 brothers from Iowa, who are buried side by side. And I just didn't realize at the time that the US Army and government had this policy of burying brothers next to each other. And as the father of 3 boys, it again really hit home about the sight of these 2 brothers resting forever together. And it basically inspired me to find and tell the stories of all these brothers. So to give you a little bit of background about these cemeteries, when World War II ended, there were hundreds of temporary cemeteries around the world. So due to the very heroic but grisly work of the US Army's Graves Registration Service, it was their job to go out and find, identify, and bury service members and set up these temporary cemeteries. So there's hundreds of these temporary cemeteries after the war ends. And basically, they gave the families a choice, and they had done the same thing in World War I. The families could either have those remains repatriated to their homes at no cost to them, or they could choose to have the remains buried at one of these permanent cemeteries around the world. And so about 60% of families chose repatriation, and about 40% chose overseas burial. So the result is that we now have 14 permanent American World War II cemeteries around the world. Most of those are in Europe. There is one in North Africa, which is in Tunisia. There's one in England, and there is just one in the Pacific. It does happen to be the largest of all the World War II cemeteries, and that is in Manila. So Eisenhower did not want any fallen American service members buried on enemy soil, even on a temporary basis. And so there would be no cemeteries in either Germany or Japan. If you ever get a chance to visit these cemeteries, they are incredible places to visit. They are kept in meticulous care by a small, little-known federal agency called the American Battle Monuments Commission. They do an incredible job. And they're just absolutely inspiring, amazing places to visit. And they all have these incredible mosaics on the wall. And I didn't include any of these in the book because you just can't capture on film what these mosaics are like in person. These are all made of kind of crushed glass, and they're just incredibly informative. They tell the story of all the battles. You can easily spend a day or two at these cemeteries, and it's just incredible. So the first step in this project was to put together a list of all these brothers. And so I worked with the American Battle Monuments Commission, and they really didn't have a centralized list. One thing we have at the back of the book now is what we think is a comprehensive list of all brothers buried side by side, and even those brothers who are not buried side by side. Although, as I often tell people, this is a living project. And so we want to continue to collect more information. And so Jeff Dewitt, who you'll hear from next, actually alerted me to a pair of Norwalk brothers who are both buried overseas. They're not buried side by side, but they are buried at 2 different cemeteries. And so we'll continue to add to this list. But that's the list there of about 280 sets of brothers who are buried side by side in overseas cemeteries. This reflects their hometowns, basically. And so the first thing we did I really wanted to track down surviving family members of these brothers, especially to collect photographs and historic artifacts. I really wanted to put a face to the name. You go to these cemeteries and there's hundreds of white burial markers. And so I wanted to find the families and collect photos and artifacts. So first we built an online family tree to kind of understand what the family looked like, and then used a lot of online resources, obituaries, white pages to actually contact these families. So I spent a lot of the latter half of 2018 driving all over the country. So I went to 35 states and even one country, Canada, to meet with the surviving family members of these brothers, and mainly to collect photographs and artifacts, but also to interview them about what they remembered about their brothers. So it was just an incredible experience of meeting all these people. So the book itself is organized by cemetery, and so, but it does follow the war more or less chronologically. So we start in North Africa, where the war against Nazi Germany first began, and we end in Manila in the Pacific, where the war ultimately concluded. And so we do have an introduction to each chapter where we try to talk about the cemetery itself, and the incredible designers and architects and artists who put these cemeteries together, but also to give a bit of context about what was going on in the war at that time and what were some of those major battles. But the heart of the book are the stories of the brothers. We profile 72 sets of brothers in the book. Some of these stories are reasonably well known, like this one here, which is the Nyland brothers, who were the inspiration for the Steven Spielberg film Saving Private Ryan. And so, but as I highlight in the book, the true story of the Nyland brothers is in many ways even more interesting than the Hollywood version. We also tell the story of the Roosevelt brothers, sons of Teddy Roosevelt. President Teddy Roosevelt had 4 sons, and all 4 of them volunteered to serve in World War I. And that's Quentin Roosevelt, the youngest brother in the upper left. And he was killed in World War I. He was a pilot and was shot down behind enemy lines. And the German army was so impressed that the son of a president was serving in the front lines that they buried him where he fell with full battlefield honors. And he would later be moved to Normandy to be buried next to his oldest brother, Ted Roosevelt Jr., who not only served in World War I, but all the brothers came back, all their surviving brothers came back to serve in World War II, all volunteers. And at this point, they're in their late 40s or early 50s. And Ted Jr. Became the only general who landed with the troops on D-Day, for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor. So the Roosevelt brothers today are buried side by side at Normandy. But many of these stories have never been told, such as the Smalley brothers, who were from Windsor Locks, Connecticut. Among our list of all brothers, there's only 2 sets from Connecticut. There's the Smalley brothers, who we were successful at tracking down the family members, and also the Parr brothers from Hartford, who were on our list, but I was unsuccessful at tracking anyone down. And again, as I said, this is meant to be a living project, so we do want to continue to find those families and collect these materials. And so the Smalley brothers were sons of Polish immigrants. And in the spring of 2018, I went up to Windsor Locks to meet with Edward Smalley Jr., who's the son of one of the brothers. And appropriately enough, the VFW hall where I met with him is named in honor of the Smalley brothers. And those 2 brothers were killed just 10 days apart, and they were both serving in Patton's Third Army. So sadly, Edward Smalley Jr. Not only lost his father in the war, but his mother actually died due to complications of childbirth. And so he was left an orphan at a very young age. But I got to meet with him and hear his incredible stories about his father and his uncle. So we also tell the story of the Preddy brothers, who were from Greensboro, North Carolina. So on the upper right there, that's George Preddy Jr. And he only weighed 125 pounds. And he was actually rejected as a naval aviator 3 times before he was accepted into the US Army Air Forces. And so when he showed up to join a new fighter squadron in England, the commander asked, "Are you sure that skinny little kid can fly?" Well, that skinny little kid could fly. George Preddy Jr. went on to become the top P-51 fighter ace in World War II. His younger brother, Bill, was also a decorated P-51 fighter ace, and both of them were killed in accidents in 1945 and are buried today side by side in Lorraine American Cemetery. Early in the war, George Preddy Jr. was actually injured in a training accident in Australia, and he wrote a letter to a friend explaining why he needed to return to action. And he wrote, "I must go back to do my part. Back to," let me just see this, sorry. "I must go back to do my part, back to fly and give again. And I'm not afraid my plane may be shot away, but I have wings not of wood or steel or stuff, but wings God gave my soul. Thank God for wings." So we also tell the story of the Trimmer brothers, who were from Salem, Ohio. And again, like all these brothers, I went out to meet with the family. And I met with a woman named Margaret Paxson White, who's actually a half sister of the Trimmer brothers. And I asked her, what was it like to lose two of your half brothers in the war? They had different fathers. And she looked at me soberly and she said, when you're all raised by the same single mother, there's no such thing as half anything. And that single mother was Anna Turner White, who's there in the center of this photo. And she not only lost two sons in World War II, but she lost a third son in the Korean War. And there's a couple examples of that where, the brothers were too young for World War II, but they volunteered to serve in Korea and lost their lives there. And she was interviewed by a local newspaper after that. And they asked her, what is that like to lose, three sons in two wars? And this is what she said. She said, "Naturally, I feel deeply that they are gone. But if the sacrifice they have made will keep liberty alive, not only in this country, but in the rest of the world as well, their lives were not wasted." So these are just a few of some of the amazing stories we tell in the book. Again, there's 72 stories, and every single one of them is totally different. Different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different experiences. It really was just an amazing journey for me to tunnel in and learn these stories and to pull these photographs and artifacts out. There's more than 700 photographs and artifacts in the book, and so many of those amazing stories. So if you're interested in getting the book, of course, the Norwalk Library has a few copies. Thank you very much, Cindy. That's great. You can get it at Amazon. You can also order it on our own website, which is brothersinarmsbook.com. And if you use code BROTHERS, you get $10 off and free shipping. So thank you. I will now unshare my screen, if I can do that. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Kevin, thank you so very much. And before we move to Jeff, I just wanted to also make a couple of comments that one of the things that was really striking, or is striking, about Kevin's work is that it's snapshots and snippets that are very, I'm going to use the word digestible. I mean, you get a sense of the people, these men, their early life, where they were as young men before they moved into being drafted or enlisting. You get in just a few lines, and it's very poetic and very lyrical, Kevin, so kudos. You get a sense of where the context of their family was, and the context of the battles, where they fought, where they were. And the other thing that I think is really was really impressive to me is how, again, so many photographs, and you get a sense in 2 pages of the people, of their family life, their parents, especially the brothers. And I was so struck by how much they smiled.
Yeah.
Their smile, so many of the pictures, they're smiling and they talk about what, and you use that quote, and I'm going to probably wind up with it too, but it was so much about being willing and able and giving. And this idea of service and giving, and for the sacrifice you made for us, for our freedom. And it just comes to life so much. And thank you for doing this in terms of on our national scale here. And Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you, which you've moving this into really bringing it home into our Norwalk space here.
So while I'm prepping to share my screen, I'll just say that I'm a fan of Kevin's work. Absolutely amazing what he's done. I bought the book myself, and I've helped him discover a couple of Norwalk residents that not, while he mentioned not buried side by side, one in the Philippines and one actually in Normandy. And I'll talk about that set of brothers. I also came across another set of brothers from Norwalk. One was killed in World War II. One was killed in the Korean War. They were 4 years apart in age, and it's completely a Norwalk story. So, without further ado, I might as well get going. That is the web page. As many times as I can put that out there. It's the home for all of the research that I've done, and basically my goal was, like it says on the screen, to preserve the legacy of Norwalk residents who were lost during wartime service. And not all were killed in action. Some died of disease, especially in World War I, the outbreak of Spanish influenza and that sort of thing. Some by accidents and that sort of thing. But without further ado, we'll get going here. Let's see. So the obligatory overview slide / agenda, it's a good kind of sense of the project to just answer these questions. And then the last 2 bullets there, to some of the people speak about them specifically and the impact that they had on me, and then some lessons learned at the end. So this is who we're talking about. I also have a list of Revolutionary War residents that are buried in Norwalk. I have done research on them. There's about 40. None, as I am aware of, died during wartime service. Now, the Civil War list is different. That's a list of probably 350 Norwalk residents who served in the war, and I'm going through that now to kind of figure out who was wounded in action, who was killed in action, who died of disease, that sort of thing. And I'm going to build off of that and update the webpage. But this was my initial focus, these 247. The most recent one is that Operation Enduring Freedom. That's the deployment to Afghanistan. And the most recent Norwalk resident killed was David Fahey, and I'll talk about him at the very end. And that was 2011. I can't overstate this enough that I don't want to see this list updated ever again. However, defending this nation and liberty around the world, this list may grow, and I hope it doesn't, though. So this also led to some secondary projects, looking into Norwalk residents, done some extensive research into the 19 Connecticut residents killed on the attack on Pearl Harbor. I've also collected a list of 119 Norwalk residents who are Purple Heart Medal recipients. And I'll talk about my World War I list of the nurses that are on the base of the cannon. It's kind of a unique thing that I dug into. I didn't find a lot of information on all of them, but certainly we'll look at that. And then Revolutionary and Civil War interments and their bios. So the plaques, this is the source of my inspiration, and all of these plaques are hung at the Shea Mcgrath Memorial at Calf Pasture Beach. When you drive by it, if you never get out of your car and go on the water side of that, you'll never know that the 3 plaques on the left there are facing the water. And this was my inspiration. And keep going here. This is the base of the cannon for the World War I list. So the 2 arrows you have there, the one on the left, that is exactly where the list of World War I nurses is. I was in City Hall probably 2-3 years ago, and a woman had called and wanted to know if these ladies died in World War One. And it was a kind of a placeholder, a bookmark to myself, to if I ever had the time and the motivation to dig into who these 16 ladies were. And I did have the time, and I did do that. It's all on the website. And the arrow on the right, those are the list of those who died during wartime service. The larger plaques all around the base are everybody that served, but that plaque underneath the barrel of the cannon holds a special place, because those are those that didn't come back for the most part. So, and that's right on Northtown Green. So my inspiration came from an event at the Shea Mcgrath Memorial in May of 2019. At the Shea Mcgrath Memorial, and I walked around looking at those plaques and almost was embarrassed by the fact that I didn't know nearly any of them. I didn't know 99% of the names on there. And being a career military person myself, I thought, if I'm from here and I don't know those people, and I have an opportunity to tell their story, then I need to do that. The bullet there at the time was an enemy. I felt like I needed to do a thorough job, but I also wanted to get information out there and have it augmented by things that I found after the fact. And that is exactly what has happened. As I've pushed the information out to the community, I've received a lot of responses from family and that sort of thing. So that's good. In August 2020, after unsuccessfully trying to get a book of sorts published, regretfully, the publishers felt the work was too local because it's just specific to Norwalk, as opposed to Kevin's work, which is kind of a global story about brothers. That definitely has more appeal to a publisher. And I'm not offended by that. I understand the business, and I just moved on from there. So I got the information out there on August 2020, and I'm constantly making updates. When I hear from family or I find something unique, I'll update a page. So these are my go-to research sites. The Ancestry.com and newspapers in Fold 3 are kind of under the same umbrella, and access to Ancestry gets you access to the other two. And, I found out well after the fact, after paying fees for these things, that I can get access through the library. But I've decided to keep my subscription because it's supporting archivists and storytellers around the world, and the more archival information that can be scanned and digitized and put on the internet, the smarter we'll become about our history. And then a lot of testimony from friends and family. Norwalk Library, my friends down in the history room, especially during these COVID times, have proven their relevance and their necessity in this town. I don't think, I hope that the library is seen as a resource, not just to check out a book, but there is a lot of expertise in that building, and I got a lot of help there. And they have all the high school yearbooks down in the history room. And just a couple of months ago, I made an appointment, and they let me in the building by myself to go down to the history room, and they gave me a scrapbook that somebody in town had kept nearly every article about those that were wounded or killed in World War II. And it was 4 inches thick. And I spent 3 hours on this with my phone taking pictures, and then I would take all that info back and update the website. It was something else, and I can't thank them enough. And a little plug for the library again. You're welcome, Cindy. So why did I do this? Besides the initial embarrassment, and as a career military person living in town, I should know who at least some of these people are, and ended up finding out all of their stories, really. So I have an expression that I've kind of picked up and use often, and that is, they say you die twice in life, and that is when your physical body no longer draws breath, and then when your story, nobody's alive to tell your story. And so during my research, I came to some dead ends on some of these people where I couldn't find a living family member anywhere. And I thought, well, geez, that person's story died when his descendants died, and nobody's around to tell the story. So I felt it a responsibility to go and tell the story. And it's important to me, especially for the younger generation. I saw a lot of kids out at the Veterans Day event yesterday, and it warms my heart to know that there's parents out there doing the right thing and teaching their children about what service and sacrifice means and looks like, you know. And I would love to integrate all my research into some programming with the Board of Ed at every level, you know, kind of a softer take on it at the elementary level, a little harder take at the middle school level, and then a little more deeper look through the RTC units at both high schools, that sort of thing. So we'll talk a little bit about a few of the fallen now. First story is about Friends to the End. And this has always been some mystery to me. And when I started doing this, I had to go back and check, did this really happen? And it did. So this is, the bottom right is a picture of the USS Juno. If you've heard the story of the 5 Sullivan brothers that died on the same day, this was the ship that they were on. And Norwalk's own Charles N. Byington was on the ship when it went down off of Guadalcanal. And he's considered MIA. His remains down in Davy Jones' locker, as they say. And come to find out, there's another Norwalk resident who was assigned to the same ship. So Seaman Byington and Seaman Caldera are separated by birth by 6 months, separated by homes by about a mile. And I've always wondered in my mind, let me augment that, is they joined on the same day and got assigned to the same ship and died together. And it's quite a story, and kind of dovetails into Kevin's work too. While not brothers by blood, but brothers by service for sure. And I can't find family on either. It would be great to know if they knew each other before they made that decision to join. So moving on, these are 2 sets of brothers to talk about. This is Lieutenant Junior Grade Stephen Barrow. His plane crashed in the ocean, and he's considered MIA as well. And his little brother was Army infantry and died in Korea. And I can't imagine the parents of these 2 brothers. You know, there was a calling back in that day to serve, and both of these brothers felt that, and both paid the ultimate price. The Diavanzo brothers, which now Kevin has their information, there are living family members in town who provided these pictures, actually. One was infantry. He died on June 9th, so 3 days after D-Day kicked off. He was a litter bearer on the beach, on Utah Beach, and lost his life trying to save others. And then his brother was killed on the ground. It says airborne there. He was killed on the ground, though, in the Philippines, and is buried in the Philippines. Lieutenant Gordon Buck was a caddy at Shorehaven Golf Club. 8 Bethel Street is somewhere near Partners Cafe, back in those back streets of East Norwalk, back in there. And I just imagine him walking from his house to Shorehaven and shagging balls and carrying bags for the members there. And he was called like Eagle Eye Buck or something like that. And he actually dropped out of or failed pilot school and took up the navigator career, and went down on a B-17 at sea. Sergeant Louis Dotto, Kevin had a map up of some islands in the South Pacific. The northernmost island was Saipan, and that's where Louis Dotto lost his life, along with 16 other members of the 27th Infantry that day. And he's considered MIA. His remains have never been found, nor have the other 16 members of that unit. The theory is they were lost in or buried in a mass grave that hasn't been found yet. And 4 Neptune Avenue, right in South Norwalk. And the Gregory family, for their longtime Norwalkers, know Gregory's store that was out on Newtown Avenue. No longer in the Gregory family, but still exists. And old timers like me still call it Gregory's, and people wonder what I'm talking about. And then I say, oh, it's IGA on Newtown Avenue, and then they get it. But he was killed in a PT boat. A little trivia there is the only U.S. president to be awarded a Purple Heart Medal was John F. Kennedy, who was also a PT boat pilot. Probably one of the stories that affected me most was Captain Hall. Born the son of a diplomat and a doctor, and moved to Norwalk, lived on East Avenue across from kind of where exit 16 lets out on East Avenue there. It's a residential property now. I imagine the house got torn down at some point. Spent a year at Harvard, dropped out because he was bored. Spent a year at Yale, dropped out because he was bored. Joined the Army as an enlisted guy, and excelled at all the training that was offered to him, was offered a commission, became an officer. He designed his own operations plan to parachute behind enemy lines in Italy and do clandestine missions to destroy railroad tracks and electricity and these sorts of things. And the precursor to the CIA is the OSS. And the generals in the OSS at the time liked his plan, sent him off for some more advanced training, and off he went. He was caught. He's avid skier. He was skiing to a mission by himself, and the frostbite set in, and he found himself on a farm in Italy. The locals took him in, but then turned him into the SS, who were an evil unit of the German army. He ended up getting hung. They tried to pin it on him as it was a suicide. Clearly, through the investigations of this incident, he was definitely hung with intent. They found the 3 German officers that were responsible for his death, and they too were hung in a war crimes trial in 1948 after the war. And this is right here on the streets of Norwalk. And this is a book that was written about him. I went down a road where I thought, boy, this reads like a movie. All we need is a love interest and, some great cinematography. But the book's been written. I own a copy. If somebody someday would convert that into a screenplay, I think it would sell well. I'm not sure the Hollywood nowadays is picking up projects like this, but I would love our own Norwalk's Roderick Hall, the story to be told. This is the only Norwalk resident killed on the island of Iwo Jima. Commerce Street is right off of Wall Street in the old downtown Norwalk. He was in the Marine Corps, and his name is on this monument that you see pictured up in New Britain, dedicated to all Connecticut residents that died on Iwo Jima. John Mcgrath, common name. You've heard me mention the Shea Mcgrath Memorial. John never finished high school. He joined the 10th Mountain Division. He was the first person of that unit with a long and glorious history and proud history of combat. First member of that unit to be awarded the Medal of Honor. And we had Mcgrath Elementary School was named after him. They torn down that school to build, I believe, the West Campus of Norwalk Community College. So Mayor Rilling, if there's ever another elementary school built in town, I would love to see it named Mcgrath Elementary to keep that name alive. Aurelio Mucci, captain of the Cap Pasture Lifeguards, was a Boy Scout, well liked around town, killed in North Africa, Silver Star Medal recipient. Warren Semple, State Representative Gail Lavielle, who's in the final few weeks of her stay in the 143rd District as our state rep, went to France to a memorial ceremony in honor of Lieutenant Semple. There's actually a monument in the fields of France with his name on it with other pilots, 8 air medals, which is nearly unheard of. And it's a hometown hero. 12 France Street, that's I've driven by that house 100 times, and just to think that he lived there at some point and walked to Norwalk High from there, that sort of thing. Get into some of the Vietnam War folks. Captain Joseph O. Brown. 5 Harvard Street is off of Dry Hill, which is across from Stu Leonard. So if you head out the main entrance to Stu Leonard's and go straight, Harvard Street's down on the right. That's where he lived. He was graduated Norwalk High, was on the golf team junior and senior year. And this is the plane he flew. Single seater, no weapons, and kind of an advanced outlook for infantry for ground units and was killed in Laos when we shouldn't have been in Laos in 1966. That's where his plane went down. His remains weren't identified until the 2000s. His remains are with family, and he has a marker in Arlington National Cemetery. Rit Caskey, classmate of Mayor Rillings. From all accounts, everything that I could find on him, well liked. The ladies loved him. He played guitar. He liked cars, and he was a knucklehead in high school. I think I know somebody like that. But anyway, just the story of the town. Michael Scanlon, 45 Maple Street. This is across from the entrance to the Norwalk Hospital, apartment building there. Lived with his dad there. His mom lived in Massachusetts, where he went to high school. He was 5'0" and considered to be too small for a Marine, and ended up overcoming that obstacle. Had deep faith in Christ, and these are the things that drove him. And his Silver Star Medal citation reads like a movie. And one of ours, Danny Shea. Everything that I've read about him, quiet kid, unassuming, and volunteered and was a medic and saved 4 people's lives. And when he went to save the 5th, his life was taken. Sergeant Tarcy, this is somebody that knows service. Bottom 2 bullets there. Served in the Navy, joined during Korea, served 4 years, came back home, served in the Norwalk Police Department for 2 years, then went in the Army. When he was killed, he was married and had 3 children. And I was able to get in touch with one of the surviving daughters. One of the other ones is living in Europe somewhere, and I'm unable to track her down. But Alfredo Perez, well known around town. The Alfredo Perez Foundation is strong in veterans advocate issues around Norwalk and in the state. He was killed guarding a hospital, he and 2 other members of his unit. During freedom, this is David Fahey. He went to high school, private school in Danbury, but lived in Norwalk for some time of his childhood. And his family live in the area and are at nearly every ceremony that Norwalk has honoring our veterans. So my motivation to kind of go back to my original comment about being a life, or not a life member, but a longtime member of the military, and needing to know who these people were, and then to share the story with future generations in Norwalk. There were a lot of highs and lows in telling these stories. Each story that I could ended with me visiting their gravesite where I could. Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut are the states that I visited to get my own picture of their headstone. There are quite a few buried in overseas cemeteries. We have 2 Norwalk residents buried in Normandy and 3 in Sicily, Rome. Kevin talked about those. Personal impact to me is I will do this for anybody for free. I've been contacted by people that know that I do this, and I'll dig into my resources and try to tell the story of their loved one who may have paid the ultimate price. And that concludes my presentation. If there are questions, I'd love to hear them, and Kevin would too, I'm sure.
Thank you so very, very much, Jeff. Before we move to questions, I'm going to I want to make one observation, Jeff, about the scope of your work. I find that, going back to the Revolutionary War and then bringing it to contemporary, I mean, it really brings to life so much of what our community here in Norwalk, again, the historical context, but again, bringing, especially just in your sharing here, and I encourage everyone to go on to the website, which again is norwalkctheroes.org. It brings to life, it's not just a name on a memorial or on a tombstone for that matter. It's how it's brought to life. And we do have some questions for you both. And before we do that, I just think or I thought it would be wonderful if we have Mayor Rilling, since he's still with us, maybe just to share a few reflections on what you've heard and experienced so far this evening. You just have to unmute, Mayor.
I was getting a notice that I could not unmute myself, but this was just an amazing presentation from Kevin and from Jeff. You know, 2 years ago, Jeff and I were sitting next to each other when he was a keynote speaker at the Veterans Memorial Committee. And he indicated that he was surprised that Norwalk did not have a Veterans Liaison Committee to help veterans when they return home and help them have access to good health care, employment, all the benefits that they've earned. So Jeff, being a military person, I was surprised because generally military people know that you don't volunteer for anything because you're going to be picked. So Jeff sat down next to me and I said, well, thank you for bringing that to my attention. You are now the liaison for the Norwalk the community. And you know what? I always say that the sign of a good leader is to pick the right person, put them in the right place, and get out of the way and let them do their job. Well, Jeff, you've proven that I'm a good leader because you have risen to a level that I could never have anticipated. And I certainly appreciate what you've done. You know, you start talking about people dying twice. You are bringing these people back to life, keeping their stories alive, documenting the things that the heroic efforts of people of Norwalk in going all the way back to the Revolutionary War and to Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom. You know, these are such important stories to be told. And I really want to thank Jeff for what he's done. And Kevin, I have to get your book. You know, your book is, in my estimation, on the level of The Greatest Generation by Tom Brokaw. I read that book and I was absolutely just mesmerized by the stories, the heroic efforts. You know, veterans, people who have given their heart, their life, their soul, who have left their families, who have fought for our freedoms, many of whom, as I mentioned earlier, never returned home. I was surprised to know that 40% of our brothers buried together are buried in other countries, 60% here. But it's just, to me, amazing stories. You know, my wife is sitting next to me. You can't see her, but she is an Army brat. Her father was, oh, now you see her. Her father was a lifetime military Army person. And during his service, my wife went to 21 different schools, serving in Germany and Japan and other places around the world. In 1967, I entered the United States Navy as a young boy from Norwalk, Connecticut. Back then, we had what we called the Hometown Committee. Every month, before we had the internet, I would get a letter from our Hometown Committee as to what was happening in Norwalk. Then if we were fortunate enough to get home during the holidays, they had a welcoming party, a Christmas party. We would get sweaters from Diane Knitwear. We would get ties from Corday Tie. We would get other little things that just meant so much to us. And I know that there is no other city in the world, any place that does so much for our veterans than the city of Norwalk, Connecticut. When I was looking at Jeff's presentation and Kevin's presentation, I had tears in my eyes. This is, I thank both of them, and I thank the Norwalk Public Library for doing this. And I can close by saying just God bless our veterans, our heroes, and God bless this very, very amazing nation that we so proudly call the United States of America.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Mayor. We do have a few questions, and we have a few minutes left. So I'm going to begin actually with a question that's going to go both to Kevin and to Jeff. How have you, and I think Jeff, you kind of alluded to this towards the end of your talk, but how have you changed and been impacted? Or you used the word impact, Jeff, but how have you changed since you began these projects? Jeff or Kevin, whichever. Kevin, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe it's similar to Jeff's experience in that I think, kind of being a student of the war. As I said, I grew up hearing war stories, but I would say I was much more a student of the war. And so, but when you go and actually meet these families and hear these personal stories, it very much personalizes and humanizes the war. And so, for me, that had a big impact on me, because it went from something theoretical to where it's very real with these people. I interviewed a number of, like Edward Smalley Jr. He never knew his father. His father died when he was, 3 months old. And some of those interviews with children of brothers who never knew their fathers, it was very, very emotional, because they had, as a woman in Seattle told me, she said, there's been this hole for 75 years and there's just no one been there. And so, and in many cases, people were bringing back, memories that they hadn't talked about in a long time. And so for me, it was that experience of kind of going from something that was a little bit more theoretical to very much making it a personal human story. Was really, that was an amazing experience for me.
Yeah.
And for me, what started out is, just researching some names. The more I dug into it and the more that I gathered, I felt a deep responsibility about it all. Like, this is a story this website's gonna outlive me, I hope. And that future generations need to learn from this. This is our history, and service and sacrifice need to mean something. And to kind of close out my thoughts about this, it's that level of responsibility, but some of the lowest and deepest moments, we're standing in a cemetery looking at a footstone or a headstone and realizing that at some point a funeral took place there and a hero was buried there. And in that day and time, if I could go back and just, be there and talk to the family and console and that sort of thing. In a lot of these cases, you can't anymore. Families are either moved away or, just over time, you lose track of people, especially, it's a family of 5 and the only son dies, but all 4 daughters marry and their last names change. And then it becomes, kind of a Sherlock Holmes of the internet to figure out where some of the family ended up. And again, the overriding thing is that I felt a deep responsibility about it. And it didn't start out like that. And now that I'm digging into the Civil War list, which I have right here, 12 pages thick, I'll get done with it eventually, but those are stories that need to be told too. And it's an honor to do it.
Thank you. Another question for both of you. We're thinking a lot these days, I think, even perhaps more than we might normally be doing, about principles and values and character. And the stories of these they're stories, but they're of very real people, of these service members. what can these stories of these peoples tell us about principles, values, and character? What one or two things really came out as very strong examples of, again, values and character, and also, I guess, meaning and purpose in life?
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it's so inspiring to read these stories. You know, same, I'm sure, for Jeff's experience. You know, many, you know, in World War II, many were drafted, but many were volunteers. And whether drafted or volunteers, they all, you know, they all believed in serving their country and serving a cause. And, you know, just like a couple of those quotes that I used of just this incredible kind of bravery, and, you know, not that they were not afraid to die, they certainly were, but that they were willing to, you know, they had a duty to themselves and to their country and to their community to serve, and they did that. And so, I mean, I mean, the book, I think, is just ripe with stories of character and principles. You know, one thing that comes out in my book is how, you know, World War II was, everybody served in World War II. You know, there's very wealthy, very well-educated families that are serving, very poor, you know, from a coal town in Kentucky serving. You know, it was every class of people, every type of background. It did not distinguish between anyone. And, you know, I just think it's, you know, I use that quote from Anna Trimmer White, you know, who lost, you know, 3 sons. And this idea of not just, it wasn't just for the freedom of Americans, it was for the freedom of people around the world. I mean, that's really inspiring. I think any American should be proud that so many people, and again, it's the same in other wars as well, where Americans went overseas. I mean, not often for their own freedom, right? I mean, we were never really at risk of being invaded in World War II. Or World War I, but for the freedom of others. And it's something everyone should be proud of. And I think soldiers had a sense of that, but it was an incredible sense of honor and duty that they owed to themselves, to their family, to their country, and to their community.
And it strikes me too, from what you're saying, it's a selflessness. It's caring about others and putting others before you. And I'm struck in both of the work that you're doing of the selflessness and giving to others. Jeff, would you like to add to some thoughts on that?
Sure. You know, spent 26 years in the Air Force. Air Force has 3 core values. The second one is service before self. And I think that is getting lost in today's youth a little bit. You know, church attendance is down, membership in organizations is down, and I don't understand why. I mean, it could be a generational thing when you think about the timeline of where we were in World War II. A lot of people that joined in World War II had family that served in World War I, so that service was passed down. I heard a story yesterday that I heard for the first time at Veterans Day, and that was on December 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor, 1941, when President Roosevelt declared war. 50 people from that high school class, that senior high at Norwalk High School, dropped out and joined the service that day. And that the lines were around the corner, recruiting stations everywhere. And so where does that come from? That's where you're putting everything about your life aside in order for a larger calling, for the flag, for country, for freedom, liberty, especially other people's freedoms around the world. And to Kevin's point, yeah, it's you know, when I joined the military personally, when I joined, it was to learn a career or something and then come back to Norwalk after 4 years, and then it became something a lot bigger than that afterwards. And especially when I was put in leadership roles where I had to mentor people about what's important about Air Force life and that sort of thing, it became much bigger than me, and remains that way, actually.
Thank you. You know, it strikes me that there is that call to do something bigger than oneself. And the other thing that really strikes me listening to you both again this evening, as well as reading your work, is these are ordinary people, but they're doing extraordinary things and such inspiration. We have one more question for you both before we close. And I love that this is not over. The work that you both are doing are living projects. So we've used that phrase before. So the real question, I think, for you both and for all of us that are here this evening, as well as going to be listening to this program afterwards, how are you continuing the journey? How can people help keep the work that you're doing alive? And the third part of it, which is a real tough one, Jeff, as you noted, how do we stimulate more interest?
Well, I'll go first on this one. Stimulate interest for my work specifically, into every house in Norwalk in some way, and through programming through the Board of Education, especially around Memorial Day. I mean, it's the perfect time. And again, at varying levels based on what kids can consume about death and service and that sort of thing, kind of deep topics for the little ones. But so the way I'm going to keep this going, I mean, when I really dug into the meat of it, it was late last year, early this year. And early this year is when everything pretty much shut down. I would like to go to the National Archives Center in College Park, Maryland, and spend a couple of weeks there. There are boxes and boxes of service records there. I did not come to a satisfactory conclusion on some of these people's lives. I was left with feeling like lost at war. I don't know where they're buried. I don't know where their unit was when this person died, that sort of thing. And those that are MIA, but potentially recoverable, I would love to get into that side of it too at some point. It's my life's work right now. I mean, it's all I do. I'm retired now, so.
Is there something before Jeff? Is there something that, again, people listening to this, that you can say, you challenge them or you invite them to take a particular step to help you in some way besides going? Again, I'm going to reiterate, it's norwalkctheroes.org.
Certainly, I may have missed a connection to family members. If people go out and say, my uncle, and they read his bio and they say, well, my Aunt Josephine lives in California, and put me in touch with Aunt Josephine, then we can continue to tell the story in a bigger and larger way. This is very surface kind of research that I've done. I haven't had the time or the opportunity, except in a couple of cases, to go and meet with families. Kevin, I commend you for traveling the country and meeting one-on-one with people. It's meaningful to them too. The little that I've had the opportunity to do that, the family just gushed with information and wanted the story told, where maybe they didn't feel like it was told well enough before. That now there's an opportunity in perpetuity to have this story out there for future generations. And I'll leave it at that.
And people care. I'm sure that's a very important part of it. Kevin, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's as Jeff was saying, it can be hard to track people down. So I said I've got about 280 sets of brothers on my list, and I had the help of my good friend Joe Geller, who's a Norwalk resident, who's retired, who was super helpful with me in trying to track down these families, because at some point you do all the research, but you need to hit the phone and actually kind of call people. And I was just reading something about polling, and it's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get polling data now is that in the 1980s they would get a 50% response rate. Well, because of caller ID, only about 6% of calls get answered. And so we were in that position where we're calling these people. We would leave voicemail messages, and there were many instances where we felt we had the right person and that they are related to this brother. And again, we know people are paranoid in this world and we're trying to sell them something or do something. So we try to leave messages and give them our website. But still, I think there were many people who didn't respond to us because they were still just worried that this is some kind of a scam or something they were trying to get out of. I mean, there were many families we finally contacted and they said, oh, I thought this was some scam or something. But once they knew what we were doing and what it was all about, they were thrilled to share that information with us. So, one of my hopes with the book is that as it gets out there and people become more familiar with it, more people that are in the back of that book will come forward and be like, oh, I think I got a call from you 2 years ago. I thought it was a scam. This sounds like it's legitimate. I would like to be a part of it. And so that's part of, just the sort of list in our book. But also, I'm excited, as Jeff indicated, some of the brothers that aren't in the book, because we didn't know about them. It's not only a living project, but a living list. We're continuing to find brothers who are buried overseas. And also, again, if the numbers are about the same for brothers, there's 60% of brothers who are buried here in the United States somewhere. And so if there's 300 or so buried overseas, there's probably 400 buried somewhere in the United States. And so we want to tell their stories as well. So it's just getting the word out and getting people to come forward with some of that information.
Thank you. Well, and I think the challenge is too, how do we better increase awareness and integrate these stories into the civic
Sure.
life of our young people. Jeff, you mentioned this early on. It's like people blithely go by, and it certainly is a reflection on how we do acknowledge and appreciate Veterans Day, Memorial Day. But I think the question that I continue to hold is how do we better get the stories out just in our immediate community? It's great doing calls like this, but I think the challenge is also for great organizations like the library, Cindy, for all the work that you're doing, but also for the schools. So on that note, thank you all. Thank you both for being here this evening. Your work has been and continues to be a labor of love, which I so admire, respect, and I'm humbled by both of the work that you're doing. And Mayor, thank you again for joining us. I know Alex has signed off to a meeting. I wanted to actually close with a quote that Kevin actually mentioned in his presentation, but I was struck in leaping through the stories again earlier today from George Preddy Jr. and one of the brothers, and he became a top PS1 P-51 fighter ace World War II. And this quote is from a letter when he was recuperating from, as Kevin mentioned earlier, from some injuries in Australia. And he wrote in the letter, he said, "I must go back to do my part, back to fly and give again. And I'm not afraid, my plane may be shot away, but I have wings. Wings not of wood or steel or stuff, but wings God gave my soul. Thank God for wings." And I wanted to share that with you all again, because Jeff and Kevin, our deepest appreciation to you both for giving these stories and these very real service members and people wings. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And again, I hope you'll share this recording with friends and family, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, Cindy, again for helping us close this out.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Wendy.
Thank you all. It was a wonderful program, and we will have it posted on the library's
Thanks for
website
everything.
as soon as possible.
Good.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.